First of all, I would also like to do the welcome to country, so to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal people past and present. And in speaking with our Vice-Chancellor, I was really delighted and surprised when the Vice-Chancellor for the Australian National University said, yes, absolutely, I'm very pleased to come and open the symposium on trade and health and issues of equity. And then when we were sitting having a chat, I said, you know, I'd never really quite thought about it before. I said, but now I am interested in what we can do about this. So for me, here within the university setting, that's an incredibly powerful and important thing for him to have said. So I'm very pleased. And I'm delighted when we were thinking of running this symposium, I thought, who on earth would want to come to something about trade, health, nutrition, equity? But clearly there is a lot of interest. We were oversubscribed for the symposium. Fantastic to see many ANU colleagues, academic colleagues I know from various other universities around Australia, a number of policy people within the room, and some of the trade negotiators, which is a real testament, I think, to the possibilities for engagement within that policy process. Fantastic. And certainly with many of the NGOs in the room that are interested in these relationships. So thank you very much for coming. I'm really delighted. We've had 2 very exhausting days of a project meeting, so on Tuesday and Wednesday. We were very fortunate to get an ERC Discovery Grant, which is looking, that's what this is on the back of. So for the past couple of days with colleagues who you're going to hear from, each of them, throughout the course of the day, so I won't introduce them all just now. But again, a pleasure of having some of the best minds in this space working together over the past couple of days. So thank you very much for bearing with me as we did that over the couple of days, and for staying on to do this. And then delighted to have, we've got 2 other colleagues who will be speaking in the symposium from here at the ANU. And I'm very pleased, like one of the things I think the Vice-Chancellor alluded to, it's hard sometimes, we close our office doors, we don't interact certainly as much as I would like to with my colleagues, both in my corridor, but in the buildings across from me and in the buildings further away on campus. I'm very, very pleased and grateful for the colleagues who are speaking in the symposium to have said, oh yeah, delighted to do that, so thank you. So why are we here? Now, some of you might say there's a whole bunch of public health people about to speak about, well, predominantly public health people, about to speak about issues to do with trade, nutrition and equity. And as the Vice-Chancellor reminded us, every public policy has implications for health, for population and public health. And we are particularly interested in what that looks like from trade policy. And I just thought, we've got this opportunity today, so you'll hear from the speakers, and we've all got something to say, but really the discussion from the floor will be incredibly important. How do we collaboratively build an evidence base that helps support trade policy development and helps support trade policy implementation in a way that's good for economic goals, in a way that's good for social goals, and in a way that's good for health goals. And I think we have really some incredible challenges ahead of us as trade policy, trade and investment policy is changing, and that's what we'll speak about for the day. As that is changing, the nature of that is changing, we are, from a health perspective, and certainly from a health equity perspective, starting to become concerned. And it's not just a poor country concern. This has implications for low, middle and high income countries around the world. So that's one of the aims of the symposium, is to raise that issue onto many of our agendas. I do also think, certainly the work, so when Michael was introducing me and he was speaking about the work that I was doing with Michael Marmot, and particularly with the World Health Organisation's Commission on Social Determinants of Health, one of the most important things that we did in the Commission on Social Determinants of Health was to get a bunch of academics, a bunch of policy makers and a bunch of non-government organisations constantly in the room together and bang our heads off of each other. And as we all know, that's a really difficult thing to do, but it was so that there was this real knowledge creation with all of the different key stakeholders, helping to think about what those policy development challenges and policy implementation challenges were. And I do hope, I don't mean for us to physically bang our heads against each other today, maybe we might have to, Michael, but that really to try and use the fact that we've got that multi-sectoral representation in the room. So that's a general sense of what we're about today. I'm going to give a sort of an opening presentation, which is really just to give a flavour of how all of the different things that we're going to speak about in the symposium, how they all hang together. But so before I do that, just to mention, we are filming the day. We're only filming the presentations. We're not going to film any of the discussion. So please be very comfortable with that. It's only the presentations. And the reason we're filming it is because when we distributed the flyer about this, we were receiving so many requests from people both in Australia and internationally to say, we would love to come, we can't come, but we would love to come. Can you make it available? And I think one of the best ways to do that is via video, not just a copy of presentations. So you'll be able to have a look at it on YouTube, the ANU YouTube. First time for me. So, if anybody has any concerns about that or at any point you want something to be stopped, please do flag that. So will I just keep going, Michael? Please. I'll shift in, okay. So give me 1 second till I get it. Okay, so what I want to talk about, so why are we concerned? What are our global health concerns? What do we think some of the causes, or the causes of those concerns? What on earth has that got to do with trade policy? And then this notion of healthy public policy, or the new parlance at the moment is around health in all policies. We have had incredible improvements, global health, so within countries and between countries, incredible improvements over the past 30, 40 years, particularly. But the point that we're raising is that there are still these inequities in health outcomes. So what we're looking at here is basically premature death. You don't need to worry about what's on this axis. And I've just chosen a selection for the countries that I could get the data for the countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And you can see how pretty much every country has improved in terms of premature mortality. But a question remains as to why does Mexico still have higher levels compared to countries like Australia or Japan? There's no biological reason for that. We've still got these inequities. The disease burden has shifted globally. So this health transition has taken place around the world and within countries. And what we've got now is a predominance of non-communicable diseases. So before, we're certainly in low and middle income countries, and it still remains that it's still a big problem, the idea of communicable diseases being the major disease morbidity and mortality problem. That's not the case anymore. It's distributed differently in different countries for sure, but the idea that we've got a non-communicable disease problem in every country around the world is something that I think we have to really pay attention to. We'll miss the boat if we take our eye off the fact in low and middle income countries we have this shift into non-communicable diseases. And that's not equally distributed. I've stolen these slides from my colleague Rosemary Corda, who does some of the best work in this in Australia, looking at the social gradient in health. And these pictures, we could be certainly in any high-income country, how non-communicable diseases are socially graded. So the worse off you are, or as a social group, the more likely you are to experience whatever that non-communicable disease is. And certainly you could say, okay, from a social justice perspective, there's no reason why that is the case. But it also costs us a lot of money. Those the health burden and the inequities in the health burden costs us a lot of money. And these are some very recent analysis that were done within the Australian context that tells us how much we could save if we prevented those inequities. So there's an efficiency argument for thinking about health inequities as well. So if we've got this, if these are our global health challenges, and that of course doesn't give you the full story, but if these are some of the health challenges around the world, what's causing it? And this slide that everybody that was involved in the Commission on Social Determinants of Health uses every time we talk. But it's the idea of saying, so if you start a conversation about health and you start a conversation about health inequities, immediately the conversation goes to medical services. Medical services are vitally important for addressing health problems, but they are not the silver bullet. They most definitely are not going to solve all of the problems. And what this is supposed to say is most definitely we can treat people, and we have to treat people, and we have to treat people equitably, but we have to think about what's causing them to be in that situation in the first place. And what we did, we had over 1,000 scientists of various shapes and forms involved in the Commission on Social Determinants of Health, and we were looking at the global evidence base of what could be done to address a number of factors, which I'll speak about in a second, a number of factors that was contributing to these health problems in countries around the world. So what was causing it? But what could be done to address it, and as much as possible, why that action wasn't taking place. And this was one of we had a number of lines that come out, but this was one of the summary points that we made. So the idea of that distribution of health is most definitely not a biological issue. This idea of social policies, economic arrangements, so social policies, economic policies, and issues of politics, of course, being right central into the things that affect people's daily lives. And that's really what Amartya Sen, so the Nobel Prize winner in the time in economics, Amartya Sen kept reminding us of saying, so we would have a discussion about, okay, we need to do something about economics, we need to do something about social policy, so we kept splitting it all up, but what he kept telling us was, remember that it is about economic development, the idea of economic success, but it's not just about economic development. The sense of empowerment at the individual level, at the community level, at the group level, and at the country level, arguably, having control over our lives. And I think this issue of power and control is very central to our discussions that we'll have today. That's in essence what this is about, having enough material resource to lead a life we have reason to value, having enough psychosocial well-being and control over our lives to lead a life that we have reason to value, and having voice in the agendas and in the decision-making processes that affect our lives. That can be at the individual, or it can be at a country level, and if you think within trade negotiations, these things are very relevant. So what do we mean by these causes of the causes? And I've summarised them like this. This notion of health and health inequities are socially produced. So that's sort of there in the centre. I've spoken about this sense of empowerment, creating material, psychosocial and political resource for people and groups. That then, of course, is affected by the conditions of our daily life. So the quality of our healthcare, access to quality medicines, to quality healthcare, access to education, access to good quality labour with good labour standards, etc. But ultimately, those daily living conditions are all affected by the distribution of power, money, and resources. So the sorts of things like trade agreements, trade policy, like broader macroeconomic issues, affect the consequences for daily living conditions. And we're going to unpick that throughout the course of the day. How does it get into our bodies? Because of course it looks very far away. As the Vice-Chancellor said to me, how on earth can you, how does trade policy possibly connect through to population health? And there are ways of it being embodied in our bodies, if that's not a tautology. And this is just some of it. So I've highlighted in blue. So if in terms of our daily living conditions, there is unemployment, high levels, continuous chronic unemployment, insecure work, poor labour conditions, that gives chronic stress. Now, we all have stress in our everyday lives, and that's fine. We manage that generally. But if you have that in an ongoing manner, it gets into the brain. There is a biochemical hormone pathway that affects our body. Similarly, if our coping mechanism for some of these issues along the top is that we smoke a lot, we eat rubbish food, we take illicit drugs as a coping mechanism for all of this, again, that's chronic stress. And again, of course, it has direct physiological harm straight into our bodies. And the consequence of the combination of all of these things over time is this enduring chronic stress, which we are now seeing, well, which we have seen expressed in populations around the world in terms of high levels of anxiety, high levels of depression, and high levels of non-communicable diseases. And as I say, we'll speak about this as we go. So what on earth has it to do with trade policy? Well, going back to the image that I showed of at the top, this distribution of power, money and resources, I would argue that trade policy absolutely affects the distribution of power, money and resources. How might that happen? And Ron Labonte is going to speak about this in much more detail, so I'll just say, so from a positive and a negative perspective, trade and investment, of course, has implications for economic growth. Of course, one of the things that trade and investment has facilitated is this much greater distribution of knowledge and technology. It has profound implications for our health systems in terms of access to medicine, or particularly in terms of access to medicines. The effects on jobs and labour standards as a result of what's there within these trade and investment policies and agreements. And then the one that we're going to speak a little bit more about today is this issue of food security and nutrition, and Anne-Marie Thau and Wendy Snowden will speak about that more as the day goes on. What are some of the pathways from globalisation to health and health inequities? So you can see if trade policies at the top, and I've referenced at the bottom that GKN is the Globalisation Knowledge Network that Ron Labonte chaired for us as part of the World Health Organization Commission on Social Determinants of Health. And I say Ron will speak about this in much more detail. And there was also a whole series in the Lancet. So our most eminent medical journal in the world, one of them, had a series on trade and health. I would highly recommend it if you're interested in this space. And there's just a number of ways in which, remember this notion of having enough material resource, having psychosocial control, and having political voice being vitally important for that sense of control, being able to lead a life that we have reason to value. Well, what we're going to unpick throughout the course of the day is how trade policy relates to each of those parts. And it's most definitely not experienced equally around the world. These pathways operate quite differently, of course, in different contexts, but certainly between countries it happens differently, and then when it gets within country and coming through those daily living conditions, it's very socially unequal. I'll touch on food, but as I say, Anne-Marie and Wendy will speak in much more detail. So we've got this ridiculous situation in the world. We've got 1 billion people who are undernourished, and we've got 2 billion people who are overweight and obese. So incredible nutritional challenges around the world. And what we're concerned about is how does trade policy interact with the food system? So the food system runs all the way from agricultural production through to processing, manufacturing, to the retail environment, which is what that middle thing is supposed to be. Then you've got the issues of advertising and promotion, and then ultimately what gets onto your plate. So the food system makes food available. It makes it contributes to it being affordable, and it contributes to the acceptability of foods. I'll give you a side comment of. So when talking about food, I always speak about the deep-fried Mars bar. So I'm from Glasgow. We love deep-fried Mars bars. The deep-fried Mars bar is now socially acceptable in Glasgow. We've also got one of the highest levels of heart disease in the world. It's very socially acceptable, so it's on every street corner, as it were. So it's readily available. It's very affordable. It's in the chip shops. Very affordable, and the fact that it is so readily available, it has shifted the social norms towards thinking that it's actually okay to eat, even to the extent that it is now in some of the more affluent restaurants. You know, shock horror, you have deep-fried Mars bars looking beautiful on a plate in some of the very affluent restaurants in Glasgow. But so this sense of the power across the food system to shift availability, affordability and acceptability of foodstuffs. And there's been 3 quite profound changes that have happened in terms of the dietary change, the undernutrition and the overnutrition. I'm not going to go into these in detail, as I say, Anne-Marie will do this, but incredible liberalisation through international trade, much greater foreign direct investment, and this globalised advertising and marketing. And that gives us 4 pathways through which, in terms of trade, 4 pathways that trade affects nutrition and health through the direct investment, through the implications for domestic policy, so for health policy, to be able to do what it's supposed to do in terms of protecting nutrition and health. The issue of the quality of the foods and the amount of it that's coming into different countries, and public revenue as a result of tariff reductions. One slide on the foreign direct investment. Some work that's been done by Karina Hawkes and followed up with Anne-Marie Thau is what happens when you open up foreign direct investment into some low and middle income countries. This is in Thailand. And what happened over a 5-year period, you don't need to, sorry, you might not be able to read the detail. In essence, we saw an explosion of highly processed foods. And for the nutrition and health people in the room, highly processed foods mean high fat, high salt, high sugar, which is not good from a health perspective.
One of them is junk food.
Junk food. So if you've got more of that coming into a country, now of course there are other quality foods coming into the country as well as a consequence of foreign direct investment, but it's just one of the things that from a public health nutrition concern, if you've got what I've called the convenience food creep into countries, and we've seen what's happened in Thailand in terms of non-communicable disease going like this. So you'll hear more about that in the rest of the day. So what about trade policy? Why is it any different now? Why are we really concerned now? Trade policy has changed phenomenally, and Ron Labonte and Peter Drahos will speak about this. There are, I suppose, in essence, what we've got now in trade policy is trade and investment coming very closely together, and we've seen this explosion of the bilateral investment treaties over time. Really, the one to look at is the green line, and how that has really escalated since the early 90s. So whilst the multilateral system has sort of stalled, we've seen these other things taking place, and one is a proliferation of the investment treaties, and the other is the development of what's been referred to as deep regional trade agreements. And all I want to point out in the deep regional trade agreements is it's a combination of the traditional issues, so the movement of goods and services down this corner, but also we've got these issues of investment, of procurement, of policy, competition policy, that takes us into quite a different realm of what does this mean for what happens domestically if this is taking place through the trade and investment treaties. And as I say, the colleagues will speak about this much more. So this is just a little bit of a summary. So we've got more, it looks more like investment possibly. The idea within these new types of this new type of trade policy, much more around issues of intellectual property, of investment protection and regulatory cooperation. From a food and health perspective, some of that is fantastic. That has incredible opportunities to support much better quality foods coming into countries, much better availability of quality foods in countries, but it does pose some concerns, and we'll speak about that as we go. This issue of power imbalances we'll certainly talk about, and we are concerned about what it means for the food industry, and particularly the food industry being at the table, and these policy approaches supporting the transnationals rather than the domestic citizens, which of course all of that brings risks to health. Deb Gleeson's going to speak about, give us the scene for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, so the new, exciting, big regional trade agreement that's currently under negotiation. These are the countries that are currently involved. 16 rounds of negotiations currently completed. There's another round coming up. And the idea is that we'll have this, the TPP signed off hopefully this year. What might that mean for us from a health perspective? Well, I'm not going to go through any of this in detail. As I say, this is what Deb will speak about in much more detail this afternoon. But I've just flagged some of the points where we might be concerned from a public health and certainly from a nutrition perspective. This idea of the investor-state dispute settlement, although we have to say Australia has been incredibly strong in saying no to this in terms of what it will mean for Australia, so that's, I think, certainly to be applauded. But the concern, and certainly my concern from a nutrition perspective, is the foreign business being able to dictate what will happen to domestic health policy. So, what does it mean? How might we think about all of this in terms of health in all policies or healthy public policy? And really, I think what we're talking about is coherence between the different policy goals. This is some work by Tim Lang and colleagues who looked at what this means from an obesity perspective, and looking in these different policy domains, what were some of the risks from a public health, or in this instance, obesity. And I use that really just to say, there's much more that we could say around trade, but really just to say, so we're trying to think about how we get economic goals, how we get social goals, and how we get health goals, the coherence between these goals taking place. And one of the mechanisms that's been developed internationally is what's been called health in all policies, and we can talk about the challenges of using that term another time. But so you can see what it's saying. So the idea of working across government departments to think about the health impacts of the non-health government departments on health, and then working within the health department to think about how what they do can help achieve non-health sectoral goals. So it's this idea of a complementary pursuit of health, social and economic goals, and I would love to see if it's something that we could think about within the trade policy space. It requires incredible leadership. When we launched the Commission's report globally, but in London, the Prime Minister stood up and said, we think this is an incredibly important thing. It was the fact that it was the Prime Minister who said that and not the Minister for Health. No disrespect to the Minister for Health, but the Prime Minister made it a central government issue. And my apologies to Minister Emerson that it's a terrible looking photo. But the fact that the Minister has been strong on saying we're going to make sure that we don't let go of the some of the security around our PBS to do with the investor-state dispute settlement, that has to be applauded. And for us within public health, and I know that colleagues within the advocacy groups are sending that message to the government, but we are asking for the Trade Minister to be very strong in recognising that there are all of these wider issues that trade policy could impact upon, and having that leadership. But it requires a combination. Good governance is not just about government. It's about having all of the different stakeholders and different actors at the table with a say. Remember that idea of having the three component parts of empowerment, and one of them being having political voice at the table. And where we've seen successes internationally, I'm not talking specific to trade now, but where we've seen successes internationally around healthy public policy is where you have civil society groups at the table, where you have other issues, other agendas at the table, and facilitating that. It's been fantastic to have had the stakeholder forums for the TPP negotiation processes, been able to go along to the stakeholder forums from civil society perspective and been able to talk about these issues. I think that's an incredible thing to have. We need much more of that. And this is the last slide, informed by evidence, and this is a plug, of course, for the fact that we've got this ARC grant, which, as I say, we've been doing for the past couple of days, where we're looking at, this is it down at the bottom, but the idea of there are many different disciplines, perspectives and disciplines, sectors in the room today. I would love to have ongoing engagement with you. I do think one of the the trade and health is such a complex area, it's such a challenging area to work in, to research in. It would be fantastic to have a real interdisciplinary and real intersectoral collaboration. And I do hope one of the things that I want to do after this symposium is work out some mechanism that we keep those that are interested in the room, how we keep these sort of dialogues moving forward.